the shifting demands of the warehouse, how the threat of tariffs affect consumers, and truckers' pay is on the rise. Pull up a chair and join us as the editors of DC Velocity discuss these stories as well as news and supply chain trends on this week's Logistics Matters podcast. Hi, I'm Dave Maloney. I'm the Group Editorial Director at DC Velocity. Welcome. Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. Have a new warehouse project, WMS conversion, reconfiguration, or a new facility? ID Label is here to help. ID Label manufactures durable labels and signs for your warehouse, and their in-house team also installs them. Visit idlabelinc.com to request a free sample pack for your next project. ID Label, when we do the barcodes, you can do more. As usual, our DC Velocity senior editors Ben Ames and Victoria Kickham will be along to provide their insights into the top stories of this week. But to begin today, as supply chains adjust to changing conditions, they'll continue to need tools to increase flexibility, speed, and productivity. And that's where technology can come to the rescue. To find out more about how technology can help in the warehouse, here's Victoria with today's guest. Victoria?
Thanks, Dave. Our guest today is Ken Ramoutar, Chief Marketing Officer at supply chain technology company Lucas Systems. He's here to talk with us about the changing demands of the modern warehouse and how technology can help. Welcome, Ken.
Thanks, Victoria. Glad to be here.
So, what do you see as some of the greatest changes taking place in the warehousing environment today? Just if you had to list the top level issues.
We've at Lucas have been around. We've been around 27 years in the world of supply chain. We have been in over 400 distribution centers. So we've seen quite a bit of change. And I would say the biggest thing that we're seeing is really that distribution operations are really struggling to adapt to unforeseen changes in the business. And what I mean is, these changes range from supply chain volatility, which has really spiked up post-COVID, to shifting customer demands, to new regulations. All of these things land in the distribution center. I would say right now, distribution is getting a lot of curveballs.
I think I would agree with that. I think most of our listeners would too. Well put. How can technology then kind of help to address those changes?
But I think tech can have actually pretty big impact. You can certainly use technology to automate many warehouse processes. And those things lead to things like reducing labor, increasing accuracy, or eliminating, say, wasted travel time, for workers. But the one thing to note is, not all warehouse technology is equal when it comes to this notion of change and flexibility. So when it comes to making changes and responding to disruptions, when you look at the range of automation, software-based automation, has a real advantage over, say, fixed or mechanical automation. It's much easier to reconfigure when you want to make process changes, when there's new requirements. We're seeing a lot of our customers having to go, for example, to shift a lot of their business now to direct consumer to compete. That's a pretty big shift in terms of what you have to do inside the warehouse.
So, Lucas has long been known for its voice technology, but your company has evolved with all these changes as well. I wonder if you can kind of briefly describe that evolution and where the company is today, sort of along the lines of what you were just talking about in terms of, automation and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Lucas, was, really founded itself around what we call the speech recognition technology. And we spent many, many years perfecting that. When the company was started, that speech recognition technology was not nearly at the level that it is today. And it's really matured nicely. As I mentioned, we're deployed in over 400 warehouses around the world. And our speech capability now we do something called the, dual speech engine recognition. It's pretty unique in the industry. We do it in over 30 languages. And right now, it requires no training. The days of, training your speech engine, you don't have to do anymore. Somebody can pick up and go. But, really speech or voice tech, it can only take you so far. So what we've really been focused on, over the last, say, 10 years or so, Victoria, is really around the smarts and the optimization that feed the voice technologies. Voice is really good for interacting with workers, but much of our focus has been around how do we add more smarts optimizing workflows in the warehouse, things like picking, replenishment, loading, slotting are examples. So there's big gains in the optimization.
So, along with that sort of evolution of technology, I wanted to ask you about artificial intelligence. In many ways, we joke sometimes it's a buzzword, but it's also kind of game changing for many industries. And I think supply chain is one of them. What do you see as AI's role in the warehouse and the broader supply chain? And do you agree that it's got a lot of potential to change things?
Well, certainly, without a doubt, it's getting pretty buzzwordy, and you have to try to work to cut through what's buzzwordy and what's really practical. But we think here at Lucas that AI has a lot of promise in the distribution center, and really because there's a lot of problems in the distribution center that are really difficult for humans to do well, and to do it in real time. And that's really one of the keys, I think, today is of really running a competitive distribution center. So, if you look at supply chain, it's data rich. So it's really a perfect place to use technologies like AI, which are, they're all dependent on data. So you can use AI in a warehouse to do things like optimize picking, deploy your labor most efficiently across the warehouse, especially when things change. You can reslot products on the fly. And I think one of the real advantages is using this kind of AI machine learning tech is that it continues to get smarter as it gets more data and sees more patterns. And so I think there's a real opportunity in the distribution center for AI.
How is your company using it? And, can you talk about some of the other practical benefits these AI-based products can bring? You mentioned a couple, but,
Yeah.
how are you using it and what else can it do?
Yeah, as I said, we're pretty bullish on AI. Lucas has been incorporating AI and machine learning, which is a section of AI, in our solutions, over the last few years. We're really trying to use AI to really make the warehouse more dynamic. That is to have this responsive, dynamic capability. We really feel like that's a real key to competition going forward. So some of the things that we've been working on are things like AI-driven intelligent batching of orders. That can be a really complicated process and very difficult for managers and supervisors to do. You can do things like optimize pick pass on the fly. You can prioritize orders dynamically, and that, as those come in and change, especially in e-com businesses, or you can dynamically reslot the warehouse throughout the workday, which is really an entirely new way to do slotting using AI and machine learning tech. Having this kind of tech to sift through just large amounts of data, an abundance of data, is something really difficult for people to do and to do it well. So AI really works well. In many cases, you can push a button and get answers that would be very complex to do. And typically, some of those things would take months to do if you had to do them. Take dynamic slotting, for example. Slotting, for example, takes typically months of analysis. With AI type technologies that we have in our dynamic slotting, all you need to do is push a button and you get the best recommendations in the moment of what to reslot.
Oh, that's amazing. What's the sort of the uptake on that? Are you finding that more customers are wanting to apply this? Are you doing a lot of education around it, or a little bit of both?
I think what we've seen is customers are really hungry to try to find better answers and answers that make their warehouses smarter and more flexible. As we started, the biggest issue is ability to respond and change and do it quickly. And data-driven approaches, folks are very open to that, and they're getting more comfortable with the AI tech.
So outside of technology, what do you see as the most significant issues facing warehousing and supply chains today? I know that's a big question, but if you could, what are the biggest things, the big things on your mind, I guess?
As I said, it is a big question, and DC's get a lot of curveballs, but I think it's really about this notion of quickly and efficiently changing course, reshuffling, reallocating when business conditions change, and just read the news. Business things
Yeah.
are in a huge amount of change right now, and so you've got to do this fast, all in the moment. Many having to shift business models, manage an incredible amount of unknown in their business. So having that agility to manage things like escalating customer requirements, or reduced fulfillment times that almost near perfect accuracy. And the fact is nobody knows the future, and warehouse operators don't know the future. but they do know that they need to be able to respond and change. And so that's their biggest issue is flexibility and agility.
I would agree. Thank you very much, Ken, for joining us today. We really appreciate your insight.
You're welcome.
We have been talking with Ken Ramoutar of Lucas Systems. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you, Ken and Victoria. Now let's take a look at some of the other supply chain news from the week. And Ben, we've all felt the whiplash effects from the new tariffs. And this week you reported on how the average consumer is being affected by those tariffs. Can you share the details?
Yeah, I'm glad to. As you said, for weeks now, we've been reporting about different tariffs being threatened by the Trump administration on various countries and various products. And mostly we've been talking about the effect of those policy changes on retail supply chains and manufacturing supply chains. But how will they affect the average single consumer? That's really important, by the way, because the American consumer has been one of the strongest pillars of the economy. It's kept manufacturing and gross domestic product and employment levels pretty much churning along even through things like the pandemic. But since the policies on tariffs change so much day to day, it can be hard to know exactly which fees are now in effect, to be honest. So in the face of that, some economists are predicting that that uncertainty means that individual shoppers will probably begin to cut back on their discretionary spending, things like luxury goods and travel, and they'll save up their money because most of those models predict that the tariffs will eventually cause higher prices on goods on the shelves. And that may be happening, that form of consumer behavior. But this week I saw two measures that showed that many consumers are actually buying more goods right now in certain sectors.
Yeah, Ben, is that because some consumers want to buy goods before the prices go up?
It appears to be part of what's happening. And I think it's also a little bit like right before a blizzard, everyone rushes out to buy milk and bread, or in the pandemic, remember everybody brought loads of toilet paper. What we're seeing sort of this time around is that in a study done in March for the National Retail Federation, they found that 46% of shoppers were stocking up on things like appliances and clothing in particular. Uh, in that case, they were worried that the tariffs might bring higher prices. And overall, that seems to have helped national retail sales grow decently in March, going by US Census data. Another area where we're seeing a bump is in buying groceries. That data comes from a company called Symphony AI. They're an enterprise software vendor in California. And that company analyzed millions of transactions from customers' loyalty card data on their grocery bills. And they applied analytics to the results. And they found that while consumers might be cutting back on expensive dinners and restaurants, like we said, that discretionary part, those same consumers are evidently finding refuge in the comfort of grocery store visits and enjoying meals at home. That was a similar pattern, apparently, that Symphony AI saw during the COVID pandemic as well. But whatever the reason, for the time being, it's good news for companies in the grocery business. That report said that grocers should feel good about the outlook for second quarter shopper behavior. So, according to researchers, results like that show that sometimes shoppers' actual spending differs from their stated intentions, like what they might say in polls and surveys.
Right. And I just think it's inevitable, even though they're spending right now, that we will see eventually some belt tightening by consumers if these tariffs remain in place.
It seems likely, but whatever happens, we'll keep track on it and let our readers know.
Thank you, Ben.
Glad to.
And Victoria, you wrote this week about some industry wages that are on the rise. Can you tell us who's affected by the pay bumps?
Absolutely, Dave. Yeah, so maybe a bit of good news here. Despite the economic uncertainty we've been experiencing and talking about a lot here, wages for truck drivers and warehouse staff surged in the first quarter amid strong demand for frontline workers nationwide. Now, this is according to a report from two employment industry companies, resume building platform Resume Now and talent matching platform Talroo. The two released their Q1 Frontline Worker Demand Index this this week. And what they found is that wages in trucking and warehousing rose 16% and 15% respectively year over year, as job openings in both sectors remain strong. This was the strongest wage growth across frontline industries, followed by administrative, customer service, caregiving, and retail, all of which experienced wage growth above the national average of 3.8%.
Well, Victoria, that does seem like very good news for workers in both of those industries. What were the details and the methodology that was used by the report?
Yeah, so the index tracks job posting demand, resume supply, wage trends, scheduling shifts, and broader economic forces shaping the frontline labor market. And it's based on Talru's own data. And as I said, that company is a talent matching platform. So the index processes, according to these companies, 26 million job posts monthly, and they say they capture 187 million data points across different industries and regions. So that's what they're looking at. And in the first quarter, they found that trucking wages rose from an average of $22.05 an hour in the first quarter of 2024 to $25.49 an hour in the first quarter this year. On the warehousing side, wages rose from an average of $17.23 an hour a year ago to $19.78 an hour in 2025. They also said the jump followed a protracted softening of wages dating back to 2023. And they also noted that the effects of tariffs and other changing government policies that we're seeing now will influence how employers respond in Q2. So what we saw, in Q1 may continue and it may not. We'll have to see. Our listeners may remember there was us talking about the strong demand for logistics services in the first 3 months of the year as companies rushed to pull in all that inventory ahead of the tariffs. So, and this is just my thinking here, perhaps this labor report reflects that trend as well. Only time will tell. There is a link to the report in our story. It contains additional data on talent gaps in frontline industries. Trucking was top on that list, with job openings far outstripping applicants. Warehousing fared a little bit better on that issue, but there are still gaps in demand versus supply in that segment as well.
Yes, I'm afraid that the challenge of finding good workers will continue to be an issue for a very long time, Victoria.
I think so, yes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We encourage listeners to go to dcvelocity.com for more on these and other supply chain stories. Also, check out the podcast notes section for some direct links to read more about the topics that we discussed today. And we'd like to thank Ken Ramoutar of Lucas Systems for being our guest. We welcome your comments on this topic and our other stories. You can email us at podcast@agilebme.com. We also encourage you to subscribe to Logistics Matters at your favorite podcast platform. Our new episodes are uploaded on Fridays. And a reminder that Logistics Matters is sponsored by ID Label. Have a new warehouse project, WMS conversion, reconfiguration, or a new facility? ID Label is here to help. ID Label manufactures durable labels and signs for your warehouse, and their in-house team also installs them. Visit idlabelinc.com to request a free label sample pack for your next project. ID Label. When we do the barcodes, you can do more. We'll be back again next week with another edition of Logistics Matters. Be sure to join us. Until then, have a great week.